You were listening to the Reformanda Initiative podcast, where we analyze and discuss Roman Catholic theology and practice from an evangelical perspective. My name is Clay Kennard. I'm the communications director for the Reformanda Initiative, and I'm sitting here in the city center of Rome, Italy, with my brothers and colleagues, Dr. Leonardo De Chirico and Reed Carr. Brothers, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Clay.
I'm doing well.
Yeah, did you have an engaging weekend? Or did anything happen? Did you feel engaged in any particular way?
Yesterday, preaching on the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, was it an engaging text that you
Yeah,
preached there?
it was a very engaging text, 1 Corinthians 2.
Yeah, good. We had a good engaging moment in our worship service last night. We began our summer series on the Psalms. Last night was Psalm 116. I think it was a very engaging moment for all of us.
You're using this word, engaging. Why, Clay?
That is a really good question. Reed, why might I be using this word engaging?
Well, I will take a stab at it, but you can let me know if I'm right or wrong. But it may have to do with a book of Leonardo's who's just about to come out on May 16th called Engaging with Thomas Aquinas, an Evangelical Approach.
It's a very, very good guess.
Yeah, so obviously as the Reformanda Initiative, we're very thankful for this resource, very excited about it, praying the Lord will use it. Thankful to Leonardo for his time and energy and effort putting into to writing it. And so today we just wanted to sit down and talk with Leonardo about the book and hopefully get our listeners interested in it. And again, that it will come out on May 16th. But yeah, again, the book is called Engaging with Thomas Aquinas, an Evangelical Approach. And I would imagine that our listeners have varying degrees of understanding and knowledge about Thomas Aquinas. And so Leonardo, in your introduction to the book, you kind of get straight to the point about at least why Aquinas is such an important figure, his contribution to church history. In fact, you start off saying that to engage with Thomas is to approach one of history's greatest theological giants. Thomas is second only to Augustine in his influence on Western Christianity, and more specifically, Roman Catholicism has for centuries held Thomas as its vital intellectual champion, the most thoughtful, profound, and comprehensive voice of Roman Catholic thought. So certainly Aquinas deserves attention. And so for those who might not be well informed on Aquinas, tell us a little bit about this great medieval theologian and why he is one of history's greatest theological giants.
Well, well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the book. As you said, it's perhaps in the Western tradition, second to Augustine in terms of influence, not only on the medieval theology, but on the modern theology and even present-day theology. There is a renaissance of studies on Thomas and interest in Thomas. And so he is a medieval giant that has exercised an influence across the centuries and across the board of Christianity, mainly in Roman Catholic circles, of course, but even beyond. And so at the same time, in recent decades and perhaps a century, there's been a lack of evangelical engagement with Thomas that has created a void, a vacuum. And now people are beginning to wrestle with him, and at times they're doing it in ways that perhaps are in need to be deepened and more developed in terms of evangelical discernment. So it's certainly you cannot avoid Thomas if you only have a superficial historical awareness of the development of Christian theology. And the problem is that there have been so few evangelical attempts at grasping what Thomas did say and what Thomas did contribute to the development of Christian theology, from metaphysics to epistemology, from theology proper to philosophy to ethics, politics. Everywhere, in every of these fields, Thomas has been a significant voice, and it is for this reason that I attempted at knocking the door in Thomas's world and trying to have an overview of this giant and his output, which is impressive in terms of literary production and works and books and sermons and commentaries and all kinds of different contributions, and that make him one of the giants of architectural importance in Christian theology.
So Aquinas, being a medieval theologian, give us an idea of the years he lived. So
we are in between two anniversaries. He was born in 1225, so next year his 8th anniversary or centenary of his birth will be celebrated this year. It is the 750th anniversary of his death, because he died in 1274. So roughly 50 years, intense 50 years. He was born in Roccasecca, in a small village in south of Rome, towards Naples. He was a bright young man, and he was sent to study theology at the Benedictine Monte Cassino monastery. He went on to Naples, and then he became attracted to the Dominican order. The family was not happy with that decision, tried to change his mind, but he did not allow the family to decide on his behalf. He continued to his career as student, and he went up to then Paris to study, eventually becoming a master in theology. And then in his life he came back to Italy, Orvieto, and then Rome, where he began to write his most known work, the Summa of Theology, Summa Theologiae. And then he went back to Paris again for his second Parisian time, and then he came again back to Italy, going to Naples, where he had maybe one of the most known episodes of his life. At the end of his life, after a kind of a mystical experience, after coming back, he said famously, "What I wrote so far is straw." And he asked his disciple to burn his writings, because what he
are all of his writings.
all of them.
Okay.
Compared to what I saw in this mystical experience, what I've written is just like straw. And the disciple disobeyed, so didn't do what Thomas has told him to do, and then he died unexpectedly during while traveling to Lyon, the south of France, where the Council of Lyon had been convened, and he died in 1274. So 50 years intense, and out of that intense life, he had a very productive ability to write, dictate, and also having students taking notes. So basically, he wrote his own books, but also he dictated a good amount of work, and then he had disciples or students who would take notes. Out of that intense activity, we have his works, mainly the two summas, Summa of Theology, the Summa against the Gentiles, a number of sermons, Bible commentaries, works on Aristotle, and on other philosophers, Boethius, and works on the Pseudo-Dionysius, and a number of other minor works, but they're minor in the sense they're shorter, but not in the sense they are less important.
It sounds like he never really took a vacation.
Yeah, that's true. He was very intense, a very intense life, and dedicated to study, teaching, preaching, reflecting, and with these two main travels in his life up to Northern Europe and Paris, which was the most important university town, and he helped to establish the Dominican University Center there, and then Orvieto, Rome, and then Naples. Interesting. In a way, an interesting life in terms of academic endeavors and ecclesiastical endeavors.
But it's not that he didn't take a vacation because he couldn't find anything substantial to do.
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay. Sorry, that's a bad Thomas Aquinas dad joke for those that might get it.
Yeah.
There's a couple common nicknames that are tied to him. The Angelic Doctor, the Dumb Ox.
All right, yes.
What's the meaning behind the Angelic Doctor? I think we could probably use common sense. Why is he sometimes referred to as the Dumb Ox?
Well, that was a nickname that was given to him by Albert the Great, his own master, who, when hearing some jokes that were circulating around Thomas, that he was mute, so he was not talkative as a student, and he was also he was a big boy. Let's put it this way,
big boned. To say.
And so students, colleagues would make jokes of him because of these two initiatives, and because of these two features. And he said, well, he is now he's a mute ox, but when he's going to speak, the whole world will hear him. And so,
one of those jokes too was, why did Thomas Aquinas avoid kitchen duty at the monastery? It's because every time he tried to help, he turned the soup into a substance debate. And I promise both of you that's my last dad joke for this episode.
But that gives you the depth of sense of the depth of his work. Talking about philosophical issues, about substance, about reality, about the distinctions to be made in observing the world, interpreting the world, and then gathering wisdom and knowledge and tools from whatever sources he might look at.
Well, it's hard to get much deeper than Clay's dad jokes on Aquinas, but we'll attempt. But let's get a little bit to the content of your book. You have a thought-provoking question that you ask, and I wanted to get your input on it. In the introduction, you say, how can the Roman Catholic Church's chief theologian be at the same time a significant reference point for evangelical theology, indeed for all Protestant Christians? Indeed, that's a good question. So how should one answer and think through this question? And is it fair to say that this highlights the confusion in general that exists in the evangelical church regarding Roman Catholicism, when you can look at a theologian who the Catholic Church considers its chief theologian? Is it possible also for the evangelical church to do the same?
Yeah, it's undisputable that Thomas lies at the center of everything Roman Catholic. Thomas's Summa was on display at the Council of Trent, symbolically indicating that next to the Bible, the main authority of the council was considered to be Thomas, and he has always been key in later developments in Roman Catholic theology and even dogmatizing. And so the question is, if that is true, and I think it's indisputable, there is a consistent, although, the interpretation of Thomas has gone in different directions according to different phases and according to different groups interpreting Thomas, but the point is that his influence has been consistent throughout the centuries and at the center of major Roman Catholic developments. There is a sense in which that answers your question, that if you're not following the Roman Catholic trajectory, you will find that Thomas, at some key points, will not be a common doctor for all Christianity, if he has been interpreted and used by the Roman Catholic Church to support its own development in terms of the doctrine of the Church, hierarchical, sacramental, institutional, the doctrine of justification by faith as an incremental journey rather than considered to be an imputed righteousness of Christ, the doctrine of the sacraments that are not Thomistic in themselves, but Thomas has given this doctrine or this whole understanding of salvation. It has solidified it in terms of its sacramental outlook. And so we can, all the Marian devotions and so on and so forth, the Marian prayers, Marian spirituality, everything that is Roman Catholic has been seen, has been used and even encouraged by Thomas Aquinas. So if you're not Roman Catholic, there must be a point where you must consider him to be difficult to accept in his own architectural outlook, and then as I referred to earlier on, the recent Protestant evangelical lack of study of Thomas has led a sort of vacuum that in more recent years has been filled with some selective readings of Thomas and some perhaps too hasty evaluations of Thomas, filling some gaps but not having a fuller grasp of the whole of his contribution.
In your book, you state that one of your main objectives is providing an evangelical map for Thomas Aquinas, for evangelicals to be able to follow, to understand him better. Why is that important, and how do you go about doing that?
Well, exactly because that has been the kind of homework that has been neglected over the last century or so. So this is an introductory approach, talking about Thomas's life, Thomas's main works, Thomas's sources, and Thomas's core architectural thought. Of course, there are entire libraries dedicated to Thomas's studies, but this is a map in order to have a grasp of the main trajectories, main traits of Thomas's thought and his use, his interpretation, the interpretation of his work across the centuries. And in writing the book, I became aware that a book like this was missing in the evangelical literature. You had references to Thomas here and there, but no map, so to speak, no basic presentation of the key elements and also the critical elements. So people were beginning to read Thomas or make reference to Thomas without grasping what they were doing, or just doing it in a atomistic way or simplistic way, and we cannot afford doing this with Thomas, because unlike other medieval or even patristic authors who are less resolved and less accomplished in their theological thought, Thomas is a systemic thinker. Thomas brings about a systemic way of dealing with reality, with the Bible, with theology, with the Christian life. It's not, you cannot just use him randomly, and it's not I often, compare him with the other giant of Western Christianity, Augustine. Augustine, with all, his greatness, but his thought is still on the move, and he is not a systematician, so to speak. Thomas is this accomplished scholar, and if you don't understand what his system of thought, that is not going to help you to then make sense of the whole and the parts. So that's a contribution, just to encourage more evangelical studies on Thomas, but not without them being trapped into either uncritical absorption of Thomas or, on the other hand, uncritical rejection of Thomas. This is not the way I think we should go about in approaching Thomas.
We've seen that. I mean, we've seen well-known, well-established evangelical theologians encouraging people to, for example, go read Thomas's prayers, but without offering any type of disclaimer.
Yeah.
By the way, he wrote many prayers to Mary, for example. And so there's even been harsh reactions when a call for discernment, a call for disclaimer is being asked from people who have such visible platforms. In fact, you say in your book that, well, it's foolish to promote church history cancel culture or throwing the baby out with the bathwater. When engaging with Thomas, at the same time, a mature theological evaluation will seek to grasp what has emerged from the work of the angelic doctor as a whole.
Yeah.
So that systemic understanding of Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we, as evangelicals, this raises a good question. When we think about the necessity, we've talked about it much on this podcast, and at the core of what the Reformanda Initiative is understanding Roman Catholicism as a theological system and not approaching it atomistically, picking it apart, taking out the things we don't like, and forming a Roman Catholicism that is not fair to Roman Catholicism itself. So when we approach a theologian like Aquinas, who maybe has some good things to say and other things no, how do we avoid taking an atomistic approach to Aquinas and not ending up doing the same thing by just separating out what we like and keeping what we like and taking out what we don't like? How do we avoid that?
Well, just in the book, I have a chapter on this evangelical eclectic approach, which in some ways is unavoidable. We in reading every author, we take out of him, out of her, in a selective way what we like, and we take away what we dislike. So this eclectic type of approach is something that we always do. And that happens with Thomas too. And this has been the approach that the reformers have used in dealing with Thomas. He was such a giant; they had to deal with him, and they appropriated some parts of what he had written on and distanced themselves from other important parts. So, in a way, this is what we should do, and we're doing. Eclectically sifting Thomas's works. We have to do it. We can do it in a spiritual, intelligent way if we have a grasp of Thomas as a whole, because of the profound and systemic nature of his thought. While we read him eclectically, we should be aware of what is at stake with the whole of his project. The whole of his project is impressive because it tries to grapple with the task of representing, rephrasing, relaunching Christianity in an age that had been that was shaped around the rediscovery of Aristotle. So that had become the main academic, philosophical, theological framework in the 13th century. So he took the task of representing, readjusting Christianity in dealing with this new framework, Aristotelianism, and that is, a big, huge, important task. In so doing, that's the issue that is discussed. Was he simply adjust Christianity without compromising it, or in the attempt at bathing Christianity into Aristotelianism, did he actually come to the point of compromising Christianity and so making it something different from the biblical, Augustinian, patristic account of it? And that is the point of that is going to be under discussion, and has been the point that even Protestant readers in the past have discussed between themselves. Some would have said that in doing what he did, he enabled Christianity to become conversant with the Aristotelian framework. Others would say that he actually came to the point of surrendering to it. And both schools of both interpretations are have their own arguments. My view is that while Thomas, being complex and rich and profound, at some key points his system basically accepted not Thomas himself. He carried on some weaknesses that were also present before him, but he had the power of making them an integral part of the system as a whole. So there were weaknesses before Thomas in terms of the relationship between Christianity and patterns of thought surrounding Christianity, Platonism, different forms of Platonism, and then Aristotelianism. It is not Thomas alone that does that. Thomas gave this synthesis, this point of contact, this new synthesis between philosophy, theology, Bible, philosophers, etc., gave this synthesis a sophisticated authorization and form of legitimacy, especially when it comes to the nature-grace relationship, and a kind of defective view of the impact of sin. So once you have a system that is driven by a optimism on the capacity of reason, the will, and the capacity of our human faculties to correspond with God and His grace, once you have a defective view of sin in all of its outcomes, then the whole understanding and appreciation of the Christian life follows into a certain and follows a certain direction. So it was the Reformation, in my view, that went back to the Augustinian biblical view of sin and adjusted the Christian account of reality, having a more biblical view of sin as part of this historical flow and an account of reality whereby we're all created by God, we're all fallen into our sin, and then grace, redemption, is God's way of handling our having fallen into sin. And but sin is a crucial piece of the Christian account of reality. In some ways, Thomas, although having a view of sin and writing about it and inserting it in his own work, has a milder, defective, more superficial view of its impact. And in so doing, he has a more optimistic view of how the reason can work, natural reason can work, natural theology can achieve, the natural man can correspond with God, etc. So once you have a defective view of sin, everything else is then reframed accordingly. And that is, in my view, the main problem of Thomas's system that we should be aware of.
Because then it goes on to pack so much else, soteriology, how we're saved, how we have a right relationship with Christ, everything.
Soteriology, anthropology, ethics,
Christology, everything.
Christology. Thomas is very optimistic in our ability to be who we are. Of course, he has a view of sin, but not as a radical breach, not as a fundamental flaw that occurred in human history and has had consequences on the very the way in which we operate. He has a view of sin, but is characterized by this optimism in our faculties and capabilities and capacities.
So just to summarize, as we think about as evangelicals approaching Thomas Aquinas, it's important to first have an idea of the whole picture, his whole system, the theological system that he more or less operates in, before we can then responsibly approach him eclectically.
Yeah.
And of course that's hard. That's hard work. And I think there's always the temptation to take shortcuts. And it doesn't mean I don't think you have to read every single word of the Summa, but to address Aquinas eclectically, deciding what is rich, what is not, what should be, what is good, what is bad. There has to be, though, in the background an understanding of his system as a whole.
Yeah.
And as you just mentioned, key part of that is his overly optimistic idea and understanding of sin.
Yeah.
Sin being a wound and not creating spiritual death, just as an example.
Yeah, that's part of the book when I trace this nature grace Thomistic account of things, and I try to trace then the developments that came out of it in Thomistic thought and Roman Catholic theology.
Now, as you read other evangelicals and Protestants who are engaging with Thomas, is it your claim that that understanding of Thomas as a whole is lacking, and that there's just an eclectic without a bigger picture? Or
in recent years, there's been a retrieval of Thomas Aquinas, especially with regards, especially dealing with his metaphysics, his doctrine of God, and he has many good things to say about this. The point that some of this retrieval has been characterized by a lack of awareness of the connections between his doctrine of God and doctrine of the church, doctrine, metaphysics, and theology, as if these were parts that were disconnected between them. They're not. While there are good things about his metaphysics and doctrine of God, but out of his doctrine of God, Thomas grounds his doctrine of sin, his doctrine of then salvation, his doctrine of the sacraments, his doctrine on the church. You cannot really separate because of the systemic nature of his thought. They are not just parallel parts; they are integrated. So it's good that we can eclectically benefit from Thomas's metaphysics and doctrine of God, but not to the point of neglecting the fact that those doctrines of God and metaphysics, they are organically related to the whole. And so what I suggest in the book is to approach Thomas eclectically, but also elentically. Elentics is another important aspect of Protestant theology, dealing with other theologies, other ideologies, other religious accounts, that is, refuting them and also deconstructing them and seeing the flaws, the ideological flaws behind them. As we use eclectically, we have to do some elentics. So we're not eclectically drink whatever we read from a certain author, in this case Thomas. We appropriate eclectically within the context of knowing that what are the problems. And so not falling into the trap of optimistically embracing something that needs to be critically assessed.
Change gears just a little bit. One thing I found interesting is you talk about Aquinas pre-Vatican II and also Aquinas post-Vatican II. How, we know that at the Second Vatican Council, the Church updated its theology. It was an aggiornamento, an updating, and Aquinas was part of that. So give us just a quick snippet of comparison between pre-Vatican II Aquinas and post-Vatican II.
Well, in pre-Vatican II, Aquinas was used as a champion, leading to this form of neo-Thomism, this rigid system made of appropriations of Thomas, as if he had built a kind of castle. Vatican II reappropriated Thomas more of a Catholic theologian, not so much as a Roman defender of Roman identity, but rather as a missionary of Catholicity, able to embrace new waves, new forms, new ideas, and basically on the ground of two pillars, Thomas's doctrine of analogy and Thomas's doctrine of participation. The analogy, put it simply, is the view whereby everything is similar to other things. So there is nothing totally disconnected with other things. Everything is close to, everything is next to. And so that is very much post-Vatican II Catholicism. There is nothing alien. There is nothing strange. Everything is related. Different distances, but everything is analogical to everything else. And so that gives scope to build connections and see similarities and appreciate commonalities with Christians, other religions, non-Christians, because we're all analogical. We're all similar to. And if we are similar to, it means that we have something in common. Participation, Thomas's doctrine of participation has been used to then even reiterate and reinforce his doctrine of analogy. We not only are similar to, but we participate in one another. We are so united, so one, that we cannot say to the other, you don't belong to me. We mutually belong to one another. And that's another important aspect of Vatican II and post-Vatican II Catholicity. We're all next to one another. We all belong to one another. Therefore, if I can translate it in Pope Francis's language, we're all brothers. Mm-hmm. That explains perfectly the present day explosion of Catholicity in post-Vatican II Catholicism, using Thomas's categories of analogy and participation.
So pre-Vatican II is Roman Aquinas, and post-Vatican II is more the Catholic.
Yeah. The Roman use of Thomas is, putting boundaries and building walls, saying this is what is true, this is what is not true. Post-Vatican II use of Thomas is more, let's appreciate what we have in common. And Thomas can be used in both ways.
So 2 quick questions to close with brief answers. How would you summarize what's at stake with evangelicals approaching? What's at stake with Thomas Aquinas from an evangelical perspective?
Well, he's a giant. We need to do our homework. We don't want to be phobic against Thomas. We don't want to be idolaters of Thomas. We have to be critical readers of Thomas, appreciating much that he says, to the extent that comes out of biblical reasoning and Bible doctrine, and we have to reject where he moves away from that path, knowing that we are dealing with a coherent system. We're not dealing with a puzzle that is made of different parts disconnected. So we have to do our homework in grasping what lies at the heart of Thomas's thought, and that leads us to appreciate what we can eclectically appropriate and what we should elentically reject.
And lastly, what is your hope and prayer for this book?
My hope and prayer is that it would be a guide or a help, an encouragement to younger theologians, students, and pastors, not to be overwhelmed by this Thomas love affair that is going on, and also encouraging serious evangelical studies on Thomas and also more broadly on the great tradition that is informed by biblical discernment and evangelical identity.
But Leo, you recently had the opportunity to present a paper at a Thomistic conference in Naples, where Thomas lived and studied.
Yes, at the end of his life.
Can you share something very briefly about that?
It's as part of the celebrations of the anniversaries of his death and birth. There are a number of congresses that are taking place here and there. That was just one in Naples, an important one at the Italian level. And it was important that among the 50 or more papers read, there was one read by an evangelical that would indicate the evangelical interest in Thomas, but an evangelical critical interest in him.
Was the one out of yours was the only one read from an
just
evangelical
one,
perspective?
the only one. Yeah.
Well, Again, the book is called Engaging with Thomas Aquinas, An Evangelical Approach. It comes out on May 16th. What's the best way to get a copy? Just Amazon and
Amazon.
IVP. It's published by IVP.
Yep. So you can go to ivpbooks.com and order it there. You can pre-order it there as well. I think you can pre-order it from Amazon. And there's also going to be an ebook available.
Yeah.
You've got some good endorsements on the back. For example, Kevin Van Hooser from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School says, readers will find here wise, charitable, yet cautionary advice. You have one from Rachel Chino, who is a professor of church history at the Sydney Missionary and Bible College in Australia. She says, a book that the evangelical church needs today. And then you have an endorsement here from someone just in our backyard at the Pontifical Seminary of the Holy Cross, Professor Giulio Maspero. And he says, simply intriguing, approaches the great medieval theologian with respect and competence. So we even have a recommendation from a Roman Catholic theologian here in our own city. So yeah, thank you, Leo, for this work. We pray that the Lord would use it. We want to encourage you all to purchase it. And if you have questions about what you're reading, feel free to reach out to us. You can find us online at reformandainitiative.org. You can follow us on social media, on Facebook at Reformanda Initiative, and on X at Reformanda Rome. So until next time from Rome, God bless.